I'm Cerelia Winscott, 64 years old, a widow, and I thought the cruelest pain in my life was losing my husband. I was wrong. The deepest wound came the day I returned home for my forgotten passport and heard my own daughter whispering with her husband about how to take my house, my savings, and, if necessary, my freedom. They spoke of me not as a mother, but as a burden to be managed, a problem to be removed. In that instant, something inside me shattered. The navy blue suitcase sat open on my bed, neat and ready, every shirt folded with the precision of someone who still believes order can protect her from chaos. I had spent days preparing for this trip, the first true adventure of my own, a cruise along New England and up to Canada, something my husband and I had once dreamed about, but life and bills had always postponed. Now, 3 years a widow, I had finally allowed myself to do it. The taxi driver leaned on his horn outside, a long, impatient blast that shook me from my thoughts. I hurried through the hallway, heels tapping against the wooden floor, when a chill stopped me cold. My passport. It wasn't in the leather pouch where I always kept it. Heart racing. I rushed toward the old desk in my study, knowing it must be there among the neatly stacked documents. As I passed the wide window, my steps faltered. In the backyard, sunlight stretched across the iron patio, set where Marianne and Bryce sat with steaming mugs of coffee. Their voices drifted up, low but clear in the still air. I froze, my fingers clutching at the lace curtain I had sewn decades ago, back when life still felt whole. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was a mother, not a spy, but something in Bryce's tone, the clipped, calculating sharpness, rooted me to the spot. His words slid through the glass like knives. Your mom could live another 15 years. We can't wait that long. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My daughter let out a long sigh, not of protest, but of weariness, as though she'd been carrying the same thought in secret. She didn't argue. She didn't defend me. She just sat there, silent, while the man she chose as her husband weighed my life in years like an investment gone stale. Behind that lace curtain, I felt something inside me splinter. The horn blared again from the street, but I no longer heard it as a call to my journey. It sounded more like a warning bell, tolling for a life I thought I still owned. I held my breath, pressing my body against the cold wooden frame of the window, my heart pounding so hard I feared they would hear it through the glass. Bryce's voice cut through the quiet morning, sharp and precise, like a scalpel slicing into flesh. "Dr. Caldwell will sign the papers," he said with unnerving calm. "All we need are a few witnesses to say she's been getting confused." A silence lingered, broken only by the scrape of Marianne's chair. Her reply came soft, hesitant, but heavy enough to crush me. I already talked to Agnes. She's starting to notice things too. Agnes, my closest friend, my Tuesday morning coffee companion, my confidant. The name landed like a hammer against my chest. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My daughter, my only child, had dragged my dearest friend into this web of deceit, poisoning the very bond I leaned on for strength. My fingers dug into the lace curtain, knuckles white, fabric trembling in my grip. I wanted to throw the door open, to scream, to demand how my flesh and blood could betray me this way. But I froze. If I stepped into the light now, I would lose the only advantage I had, their belief that I knew nothing. Their arrogance would be my only shield. So I stayed hidden in the shadows of my own home, my breath ragged, my soul cracking under the weight of their whispers. I stumbled back into my room, the lace curtain slipping from my grasp as though it had burned me. My passport lay buried under the neat stack of documents on my desk, but the moment I touched it, tears blurred the edges of its navy cover. Memories flooded me in painful clarity. Richard and I sanding every plank of this house until our hands blistered. The aroma of chicken stew I made on cold winter nights, when Marianne was small enough to swing her legs beneath the kitchen table. The laughter, the bedtime stories, the way she once clung to me after nightmares. I had poured every ounce of myself into raising her, certain that love and values would guide her into becoming the kind of woman Richard and I dreamed she'd be. But Bryce's words echoed through my skull, each syllable eroding those memories. If she takes this trip, we'll use it as proof. Impulsive decisions equal cognitive decline. I gripped the passport tighter, my nails digging into its cover. The trip that had symbolized freedom, healing, courage. My chance to finally reclaim a life beyond widowhood was being twisted into evidence of senility. My boldness reframed as madness, my independence weaponized against me. Marianne's voice drifted back in, softer, but just as brutal. As long as Mom doesn't find out. The betrayal pierced deeper than any blade. Not only had she refused to defend me, she had accepted the lie, embraced it, and carried it forward. I pressed the passport against my chest, my body trembling, my heart splintering. But beneath the grief, something stirred, something steady, sharp, and alive. If they thought my age made me fragile, if they mistook my grief for weakness, then they had gravely underestimated me. I would let them believe I was slipping. I would let them think they were winning. And then I would make their own cruelty the weapon that destroyed them. I made a choice that morning. I wouldn't cancel the trip. If they thought I was naive, I would let them. If they believed I was too soft, too trusting, I would wear that mask until it strangled them. In Boston, before boarding the ship, I slipped into a small electronics store and bought a pocket-sized recorder. My hand trembled as I tested the button, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Then I dialed Arthur's number, Richard's old friend, a lawyer I knew I could still trust. When he answered, I told him only half the truth, that I suspected some financial irregularities. There was silence on the other end, the kind that carries both caution and understanding, before he simply said, "Come see me the moment you get back." On the cruise, the mask became my armor. By day, I laughed politely with strangers over buffet meals and told stories about books I'd read. Smiling so warmly that no one would have guessed, I cried every night in my cabin, in that tiny, sterile room. Tears stained my pillow. But in my journal, I wrote step-by-step strategies, what to record, what to watch for, how to trap them in their own lies. The sea stretched endlessly outside the porthole, mocking me with its promise of freedom. I whispered to myself that this trip wasn't wasted. It was my training ground. When I returned, suitcase rolling across the floor, I felt an unfamiliar tremor in the air. My desk drawer was slightly ajar. The careful order of my documents disrupted. I opened the jewelry box, 2 small pieces gone. They hadn't waited. They'd already started. I forced a smile when Marianne asked how the harbors were, describing fishing boats and fresh chowder as though nothing in my world had shifted. But inside my chest, my heart pounded against my ribs like a warning drum. They thought they were clever. They thought I hadn't noticed. But I had. Bryce's absences grew longer, his excuses thinner. He left early, returned late. Always with a hollow smile. My suspicion sharpened into resolve. One morning, I slipped on a beige trench coat, pulled a wide-brimmed hat low over my brow, and hid behind oversized sunglasses. I caught my reflection in the hall mirror before leaving and almost laughed. I didn't look like a grieving widow anymore. I looked like a woman on a mission. I followed him through winding streets until he parked outside a cafe on the edge of town. I slid into a booth across the street, my view half hidden behind a dusty window, And then I saw it. She arrived, a younger woman, maybe early 30s, carrying a little girl with curly hair. Bryce's face lit up, not with the restrained charm he used on me, but with something softer, something intimate. The girl shrieked, "Daddy!" and threw her arms around his neck. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might faint. I raised my phone with shaking hands, snapping photos as he kissed the child's forehead, his eyes glowing with a tenderness I had never seen him show Marianne, or me. Then came the envelope, thick, bulging with cash. He slid it across the table to the woman, who tucked it quickly into her purse. My ears caught fragments, rent, groceries, promises. It was enough. He wasn't just scheming to strip me of everything Richard and I had built. He was using my money, Marianne's future, to fund another life entirely. In that moment, clarity struck. Marianne wasn't only a conspirator, she was a victim. She thought she was building a future with him, but he had already built one elsewhere. The betrayal had roots deeper than I'd ever imagined. I clutched the photos and notes to my chest as I slipped back into my car, the weight of the evidence almost crushing me. Back at home, I locked them in a drawer beneath a false bottom. For the first time in weeks, I felt not despair, but a dangerous kind of steadiness. The mask of weakness had served me well. Now, the war would begin in earnest. I began to notice the smallest things in my own house, and each discovery sent an icy shiver down my spine. My pill box for blood pressure medication no longer matched my count. A few tablets were missing. At first, I told myself it must be a mistake, a slip of memory. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. The confirmation came one evening as I lingered in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator masking my presence. Bryce's voice slithered from the kitchen, low but distinct. If she gets dizzy, if she falls down the stairs, that's all the proof we need. My breath caught in my throat. Marianne didn't protest. She only let out a weary hum, the sound of someone too tired or too frightened to fight. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. This was no longer about property or bank accounts. They were discussing my death as though it were a paperwork detail, as if my body tumbling down the stairs could be nothing more than Exhibit A in their case against me. My hands trembled, but deep within me something blazed hotter than fear. If they wanted to see me fall, then I would rise taller than I ever had before. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my cardigan, fingers pressing the button of the small recorder hidden there. Every word etched into its memory was a lifeline, proof that their whispers were more than paranoia in my head. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I no longer had time. Any evening could be my last if I stayed passive. The countdown had begun, and the only way to survive was to strike first. It started with Marianne's eyes. They darted away too quickly when I caught her looking at me, her smile a beat too late, her laugh brittle like glass about to break. One morning, after Bryce had stormed out with his usual clipped goodbye, I lingered near the kitchen door. I heard her whisper into the empty room, her voice breaking. "I'm not sure about this anymore." The moment she noticed me, she pasted on a bright grin, chirping, "Good morning, Mom," as though nothing had slipped, but something had. Later that week, I sifted through papers on my desk and froze. Among my neatly filed folders lay a bank document with my name scrawled across it, except it wasn't mine. The signature was jagged, rushed, a crude imitation. Bryce had already submitted forms to shift signing authority. I photographed the document and showed Arthur at our next meeting. He frowned, his lips pressed tight. "This is strong enough to prosecute, but if we go too early, they'll destroy the trail. We need to catch them red-handed." The words echoed in me like a bell of both warning and resolve. That night, I caught another glimpse behind the mask. From my spot at the top of the stairs, I heard Bryce's harsh whisper lash out at Marianne. "Don't grow a conscience now, we're too close. One more slip from her and it's over." Her silence spoke volumes. Fear, doubt, a daughter torn between loyalty to her husband and the mother she once adored. I retreated to the bathroom, gripping the sink until my knuckles whitened. My reflection stared back, lined face, silver strands, but eyes that no longer trembled. For the first time in weeks, they looked steady, sharp. "It's time to stop hiding behind curtains," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. And I meant it. The silver gleamed under candlelight, each spoon and fork polished until my reflection bent across their curves. I hadn't set a table this carefully since Richard was alive. Back then, dinners meant laughter, birthdays, Sunday suppers after church. Tonight, the china and candles were not for joy. They were for judgment. The meal was a disguise, but the table itself, a courtroom. And I was ready to deliver the verdict. I placed the final piece, the heirloom carving knife with the wooden handle Richard once sanded smooth. My hands didn't shake as they had in those early weeks after I first overheard Marianne and Bryce whispering in the garden. They thought they had me fooled. They thought grief and age had dulled my mind. Tonight would teach them otherwise. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Marianne's voice floated through first, cheery, masking nerves. Bryce followed with that confident stride of his, shoulders thrown back as though he owned the very air he walked through. "Mom," Marianne said with a smile too bright to be real, "everything looks wonderful." I kissed her cheek lightly, breathing in the scent of her perfume, lavender, the same I used to spritz on her pillow as a child when she had nightmares. My chest tightened, but I pushed the ache down. She had chosen her path. Bryce leaned in, his cologne sharp, almost medicinal. "You've outdone yourself, Cerelia. A spread like this, at your age? Impressive." He meant it as flattery wrapped in insult. I only smiled. "Sit, please." We took our places. I sat at the head of the table, the seat Richard once filled, Marianne to my right, Bryce to my left, like two jurors waiting to render judgment, unaware they were the accused. I poured the wine, letting my hands tremble just enough for the glass to clink against the bottle. Bryce's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. "Careful now. Don't want to spill." "Of course," I murmured. "These hands aren't as steady as they used to be." He smirked, glancing at Marianne. She avoided my gaze, staring at her plate. As the meal began, Bryce's words dripped with suggestion. "This house must be a lot to manage. Too many rooms, too many stairs. You shouldn't live alone in a place this big. Anything could happen." I carved the chicken with deliberate care. "Yes, you may be right," I said lightly, lowering my eyes. "Perhaps I've been selfish, holding on to more than I can manage." I saw the spark in his eyes. He thought I was breaking, bending into his plan. Marianne's fork scraped against her plate, her silence louder than any argument. We ate in uneasy rhythm, small talk skating across the surface. Bryce kept prodding. "Imagine how much easier life would be if you didn't have to worry about this house. If someone else could handle your finances, you could relax." I smiled sweetly. "Relaxation does sound nice." He leaned back, smugness painting his features. The jury in his mind had already ruled in his favor. And then came the knock. 3 firm raps on the door. Marianne frowned, her fork halfway to her mouth. Bryce stiffened. I dabbed my lips with my napkin, rose, and walked slowly to the door. When I returned, Arthur entered behind me, carrying his weathered briefcase. A second figure followed, a private investigator with a camera hanging at his side, eyes sharp, posture coiled with quiet authority. Bryce shot to his feet. "What is this?" I set my glass down carefully, the stem ringing against the plate. "Shall we stop pretending?" Arthur moved to the table, laying his briefcase across the cloth. He flipped it open and began to spread the evidence. The rustle of paper sounded louder than the tick of the clock. "Audio recordings," he said, sliding over transcripts. "Mr. Walker, that's your voice discussing how to induce dizziness in Mrs. Winscott, how a fall down the stairs would serve as proof of incompetence." Marianne's face paled. "What?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Next came the forged bank documents, my signature scrawled awkwardly at the bottom. Arthur tapped the page. "Forgery, plain as day. Filed last month. We have witnesses at the bank who can testify you submitted these forms. Bryce." Marianne's fork clattered against her plate. She stared at the papers as though they were snakes. And then Arthur laid down the photographs. Bryce at the suburban cafe. Bryce with the woman. Bryce holding the little girl who clung to his neck, calling him Daddy. The silence collapsed into chaos. Marianne gasped, her hands trembling as she lifted the photos. "What is this? Who are they?" Bryce's face drained of blood, then flushed crimson. "This is nonsense. She set me up." He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. I remained seated, steady. "I didn't need to set you up, Bryce. You did that yourself. Every word, every lie, every betrayal. You wrote the script." He lunged for the photos, but the investigator intercepted, sliding them back. "Careful," the man said coolly. Bryce's fury exploded. He grabbed his wineglass and hurled it to the floor. Crimson liquid splattered across the pristine white cloth, blooming like blood through gauze. The stain spread, irrevocable, undeniable. Marianne's sob tore through the room. She pressed the photos to her chest, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked at me. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Bryce turned on her, snarling. "Don't you dare believe her. She's manipulating you. She's always manipulated you." I rose finally, my chair scraping against the hardwood. My voice was calm, firm, every word honed sharp. "The difference between us, Bryce, is simple. I have nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, just lost everything." The candles flickered, shadows quivering across the walls. The stain on the table grew darker, wider, like a verdict sealed in ink. The dinner was over. The trial had begun. "This is nonsense. She's crazy," Bryce roared, his voice cracking in a way that stripped the threat from it. His fists clenched at his sides, eyes darting between Arthur, the investigator, and me. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly on the wine-stained tablecloth, my voice colder than the autumn wind whistling outside. Crazy enough to hire a detective. The private investigator stepped forward, calm and deliberate, setting a small laptop on the table. He clicked a key, and the screen came alive. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Bryce rifling through my desk drawers, pocketing a small velvet pouch, flipping through my legal papers with greedy precision. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Undeniable. Marianne's hand shot to her mouth. "Bryce." Her voice cracked, equal parts disbelief and devastation. Bryce snarled, "This means nothing. She planted this. She—" "Save it," Arthur interrupted, his tone sharp. "We've gathered weeks of surveillance. You were sloppy. And tonight, you've confirmed everything with your own mouth." Bryce lunged for the laptop, but the investigator blocked him, a wall of quiet strength. The knock at the door came sharp, decisive. Bryce froze, his chest heaving. Arthur gave a nod, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence sucking the air from the room. "Bryce Walker?" one officer said, voice steady. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and conspiracy." Handcuffs snapped around his wrists with a metallic bite. He thrashed, shouting, "This is a setup! She's turning you all against me!" And then another voice cut through, soft, trembling, but devastating. "You told me you were divorced all these years." The room stilled. A young woman stood in the doorway, a child clinging to her leg. Her eyes shimmered with tears, her face pale as if the world had just shifted beneath her. Marianne's head whipped around. Who is she?" The child looked up at Bryce, her small voice ringing like a bell. "Daddy?" The sound shattered Marianne. She staggered back, her chair clattering to the floor. Her gaze swung from me to the woman, then to Bryce. "You lied to me. You lied to us both." The young woman's voice broke. "You said the divorce wasn't final, that we just had to wait. You made me believe—" Her eyes found mine, filled with shame and fury. "And all this time, you were stealing from her, from your own wife." Marianne collapsed onto her knees, clutching her stomach as if the betrayal itself had struck a physical blow. Tears streaked her cheeks. "Mom," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness." Bryce fought against the officers, his voice hoarse and wild. "She's lying. They're both lying. This old woman, she's poisoned everything." The officers tightened their grip and hauled him toward the door. His shouts echoed through the house, hollow, desperate, already fading. Silence settled heavy in his wake, broken only by Marianne's sobs and the child's confused whimper. I looked down at my daughter, my Marianne, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking. My heart ached with the weight of all the years I had loved her, the lullabies, the scraped knees, the graduations, the promises. The betrayal had gutted me, but the sight of her broken now cut deeper still. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that burned behind my eyes. My voice came low, steady, final. Words aren't enough anymore. Her sobs filled the room as I turned away, the candlelight flickering against the dark stain of spilled wine on the table. Red, raw, permanent. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered, and nothing between us would ever be the same. 6 months later, I walked along the shoreline in Maine, the Atlantic wind tugging gently at my silver hair, waves curling and breaking at my feet. The air was crisp, salted, alive. Each step I took pressed into wet sand only to be washed away seconds later, leaving no trace, as if the ocean itself whispered, "The past is gone. The present is yours." I had not felt peace like this in years. Bryce remained in county jail, awaiting trial on a list of charges long enough to fill pages: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, theft, even attempted endangerment. The man who had once strutted across my kitchen with smug confidence was now reduced to a prisoner, his future shrinking by the day. I did not rejoice in his downfall. It was too pitiful, too corrosive a thing to celebrate. But I did feel justice had finally leveled the ground he had poisoned. Marianne was living alone in a small rented apartment not far from Asheville. She worked long hours, and from what Arthur told me, she was repaying debts Bryce had left in her name. She had called me twice in the past 6 months, each conversation fragile, halting. I heard the guilt in her voice, the tremor of regret she couldn't disguise. She wanted forgiveness, but forgiveness is not an instant gift. It is a slow, uneven path. I had not shut her out, but I had also not rushed to bridge the chasm she had helped dig. She would have to meet me in the middle, and that would take time. As for me, I chose something else. I chose life. After everything. I refused to sit in that house as a victim. I enrolled in a community art class, my hands, once shaking from grief, now steady over brushes and clay. Twice a week. I joined a group of women my age in a small studio where music played and laughter filled the corners. We painted seascapes, sculpted bowls, and told stories about loss and second chances. For the first time, I discovered I wasn't alone in surviving betrayal. Then came the dancing. The first class felt absurd, I in my simple flats, awkward among couples twirling. But as the instructor clapped her hands and the rhythm rose, I laughed, a real laugh, surprised by how much joy my body could still hold, step by step, turn by turn. I began to remember that movement wasn't just survival, it was celebration. And I began to plan again, not the careful, self-sacrificing plans of the past, but bold ones, selfish in the best way. Next month, I would fly overseas, perhaps Greece, perhaps Italy, somewhere Richard and I had always dreamed of, but never reached. This time, I would go for both of us. One evening, as I packed a small overnight bag for a weekend trip, the doorbell rang. It was the young woman, Clara, though I hadn't known her name that first shocking night, and the little girl with curls tumbling around her face. Clara looked tired but determined, the kind of determination only single mothers carry. She smiled shyly. "We brought muffins," she said. "Homemade. Lily wanted to see you." The little girl peeked from behind her, clutching the plate with both hands. "Hi, Grandma Cerelia." The words hit me like a tide, overwhelming, unstoppable. My throat closed, tears pricked my eyes, but for the first time in months, they weren't born of grief. They spilled freely down my cheeks, warm with joy. I knelt to hug her, inhaling the sweet scent of sugar and childhood, my heart swelling with something that had once felt impossible: hope. From then on, they became part of my days. Clara and I shared meals, spoke honestly about wounds, about lies, about how women like us could be torn apart and yet stitch ourselves together again. Lily brought color into my home with her giggles and crayon drawings taped to my fridge. I never thought I would be called Grandma again, not with love, but she gave me that gift. And in their company, I realized something. Family is not always blood. Sometimes, family is forged in the fire of betrayal, in the ashes of what's been destroyed, rising stronger because it is chosen. Now, standing in a small hotel room overlooking the Maine coast, I set down my bag and caught my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I remembered the woman I had been half a year ago, pressed against a lace curtain, heartbreaking as she listened to her daughter plot against her. That woman had been fragile, trembling, convinced she was about to be erased. But the woman staring back at me tonight was different. Her back was straight, her gaze steady, her eyes alive with something fierce and unshakable. I whispered to the glass, to the waves outside, to the life I had reclaimed. This silence is mine. For the first time, I'm truly free. And I believed it.